going.
Okay, so today we're going to learn a simple technique for a way to use up your scraps of fabric. And for those of you who know me, I don't like to throw anything away, so if I can find ways to use it, I will. And we're going to be making yo-yos, and they're also called Suffolk puffs. And it's really a very simple little thing to do. We're just going to basically learn how to make the yo-yo itself. And then if you want to make a sachet, I'm going to walk through that with you. And then I'm going to show you some other things that you can also make with the yo-yos. And for other inspiration, you can always look on Pinterest. There's a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of things out there, a lot of ways that you can use your yo-yos. Now, I asked everybody to have a 3-inch template, and it's also a good idea if you've already gone ahead and cut out some circles of your fabric using your template. And then we're basically going to use the thread or needle, and I went ahead and did that because I didn't want to embarrass myself by not being able to see the hole in the needle. And I use about 30 inches of thread, and then you double it into 15 inches. And the reason you want to double it is you are going to pull it up and gather it up, so you want something with a little more strength than just a single thread. Now, the problem with having a muslin as my sample is there's not a right side or a wrong side. So I want you to just pretend that the side that's facing up is the wrong side. And I'm going to start with my needle coming up from the wrong side because I want to hide that knot. And then using my fingers, I'm just going to finger press about 1/4 inch, make a little hem, and as I do that, I'm going to gather in and out with my needle and make a running stitch, and I'm going to do this all the way around the circle. Now, something that I didn't know when I was preparing this class that I learned new, the larger you make the stitches, the smaller the hole will be when you gather them up. And that's what I prefer. So I suggest you make longer running stitches. Try to make them even and try to keep your 1/4 inch hem consistent. And that's going to come with a little practice. It's great exercise for finger dexterity. If you're a quilter, you know that normally you try to keep your quilt stitches the same width, the same distance apart. So this is good practice for quilting. Do we need to slow up a little bit here?
No, I just can't get it through.
That's why I did mine in advance, because I knew I wouldn't be able to see it. So I'm going to do this just a couple more stitches, and you can see how I gather it up on the needle so that I'm consistent with my stitch length, and then try to be consistent with your hem width as well. And you get the idea of what we're doing here. Now we're going to give Paulette a little time to catch up with us. One other thing that I learned when I was getting ready for this class that I think is very interesting is if you want to make a certain size yo-yo, there is a formula for making your template. You want to double the size that you want your finished yo-yo to be. So if you want a 1-inch yo-yo, you multiply that by 2, so that gives you 2 inches, and then you add a 1/2 inch for the seam allowance. Remember, I turned under 1/4 inch, so that's a 1/2 inch all the way around. So the formula is the size you want the finished yo-yo to be multiplied by 2 plus a 1/2 inch. So that's how we got our 3-inch yo-yos for today. And when they're finished, they're going to be about 1 1/4 inches. Okay. Now I'm going to let, well, you probably don't want to use one of mine, but I don't know if you can see from a distance. This one, I've already stitched all the way around it, and I've used larger stitches. Now normally you're going to use a coordinating thread, but I wanted you to see what I'm doing today, so that's why I'm using black on white. But normally I would have tried to use the same color thread. So out, the stitches would be invisible. In this one, you can see where I made the stitches really, really, really close together. So you'll see the difference in what happens when I pull it up tight. And this is where it comes in handy that I have a double thread, because you're going to have to pull it. It needs to be something that's strong. You pull it as tight as you can. And then,
I got a question.
yes ma'am.
Do you want the 1/4 inch to the inside?
Yes, that's a good question. The 1/4 inch hem is turned to the wrong side of the fabric. And then I'm just going to use my needle and take a couple of stitches to secure my yo-yo so it doesn't come undone. And you'll learn with practice to hide those stitches as well. Now, I didn't do a very good job of that today. And then instead of just cutting it off right where I stitched it, I usually will take the thread inside to the edge. You can see that. Pull it through and cut it off. And then if it is tempted to come undone, it's got a little more thread for security. So there is a finished yo-yo. Whoops. Now, it depends on what you're going to do with these. Sometimes you might want to press them if you want one that's really flat. If you want it to be puffy, then you're not going to press it. So that was the one that had the larger stitches. Now let's look at this other one. I went around it using a smaller stitch. I'm going to pull it up tight again. For one thing, it's a little harder to pull, and I have to move the gathers around as I go. And you'll be able to see this in just a second. I'm not able to pull the hole up as tight as I was with the larger stitches. Then I'm going to secure with just a couple of overlocking stitches. And I'm going to go through the center of the fabric, out to the edge, just so I have a little extra thread there. Now remember, I started with 30 inches. I'm still going to have a lot of thread left over, but it was necessary to have that much to go around the whole circle as you were stitching. And I would re-thread my needle each time, just so that the thread does not get twisted. Sometimes that can be very frustrating. Now, this is the one that had the teeny tiny stitches. I'm not sure that you can see the difference. But see how big the hole is there in the middle? With this one that had the larger stitches, I was able to pull the hole closed tighter. And I really kind of like that look better. And then again, kind of fluff it all out. And we have completed 2 yo-yos. So you can see how easy these are to make. They are a little time consuming. But it's something you can do sitting in front of the TV because they don't take a lot of concentration. There's not a lot to take with you, so if you want to take it when you travel, that's also something you can do with these and get a whole lot made at one time. Now, the project that we're learning to make today, and I'm going to come back and help Paulette, but I just want to show everybody what we're doing. We're going to be finishing up this little sachet, and I found it in this book that we've had laying out on the table today, and it's called Victorian Patchwork. So it was actually in a quilting book, because quilts have been made, are actually something that you can make with the yo-yos. So you see the finished project looks like a little flower. So I have this laying here so you can you see how that's laid out? And I put the green one in the middle so it would look like the center of the flower. And you can see how you want to tack your yo-yos together. For this, I'm going to use a single thread because it's not going to really have a lot of pressure pulling it apart, and it's easier to hide your thread. Again, I'm using a white thread on a dark fabric so you can see what I'm doing. But I sewed my center. We're coming back.
I'm not started.
I sewed my center to one of the petals. Now I'm going to lay the next petal in. Actually, I'm just going to lay them all together so you're going to see what the finished product is going to look like. Now, if you're using a light color fabric, you could probably use, if you've got one of those water-soluble markers and you wanted to mark where each touch point is, you could do that, but really, I just usually eyeball it. So you can see I've got my first two sewn together right there. I see that I want to sew this next green one about right in there. So I'm going to slide my needle through my fabric fold. Pull it out. I'm going to lay them back to back. So I can just take a little whip stitch there. And usually I just do 1 or 2 stitches, again, because if you just use one, you don't really have anything to hold on to. If there's any pressure, one can break easily. So let's just do a couple of stitches. We're going to lay it back down again, see how we're doing. Now we're going to see that we want to stitch these two together right here. So again, I'm going to eyeball that. I'm going to run my needle through the fold in the fabric. And because it's gathered a little, sometimes you have to work at that. Make sure I haven't forgotten. Yeah, about where it goes. Pull that thread up tight. Lay these back to back, about where you want them. Couple of whip stitches. And you can see your flower is starting to grow. So now for the next one, it's going to be, either way, you're going to have to go through quite a bit of fabric to get to it. So at this point, I am going to snip my thread. I'm going to, again, go through the fold just a little ways away, so I've got some extra thread if it were to pull loose. And I'm going to snip it close so we can hide it. Make another knot. And I want to come up through the bottom because I want to hide my knot. And it looks like to me the next one's going to go about right there. So I'm going to go up. Lay my petal right next to it, hide that knot inside, take a couple of whip stitches. Just to secure it. Let's lay it down again. We can see it's going to be attached about right here. So we're going to go through the fold. Make a couple more whip stitches. And I think by now you've already figured out that this is really pretty forgiving. If you don't get it exactly in the right place, you can kind of move it around. And it's still going to come out looking like a little flower. So there's a couple of stitches to hold that down. And I think you get the idea. We would continue on with the other 3 petals till we actually have all 7 all 6 petals around our center. We're going to do this twice so that we have both a front and a back. Then we're going to lay them together, the smooth sides together. And when I say smooth side, this is the side that's got the hole in it. This is the side that's smooth. So we'll put our smooth sides together and tack the edge of each petal, except the very top one. The top one's up to you, wherever you want it to be, because you need to leave a small hole in there, because if you want to add some sachet, you have to have a place to get the sachet through. Oops. So I've already hand stitched. This is going to be the sachet, and I don't know if you can see it in the one that's already complete. But I stitched around it with very small stitches because I'm going to put some lavender in here, and I don't want my lavender to come out. So after I've stitched all the way around it, which I already did that before I got here, whoops, take that thread off, and I'm going to turn this little sachet sack so the outside, so that the seam is inside. And you can also do this on your sewing machine. I'm doing it by hand because I wanted this to be a project that you could do without any kind of special equipment. If you're a beginner sewer, you could just try it out, see if you like it. And then later on, if you want to get a sewing machine and make it a little faster and easier, that's also a possibility. So you can see I've got a little pouch here. Now, if I wanted to, I could press this flat, but it's really not necessary. And then I'm going to take my little cone, put it down in there. Got a little bag of sachet here. This is lavender sachet. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but it's lavender and it smells good. I think it's called potpourri, that's what I should have said. They probably would just take a spoonful or two, and then we're going to drop it down in there. Okay. Little sachet. It doesn't need to be much, just a tablespoon or 1 or 2 tablespoons, just so you can smell it. I love the smell of lavender. And then with my thread and my needle, I'm just going to sew the hole closed. And you really don't have to worry about this being pretty because it's going to be inside the sachet, so nobody's really going to see it. And it doesn't even have to be perfectly circular. If you have an iron, you might be able to press it a little better before you stitch it, but I'm just going to take my needle and again do a running stitch across the top, close it. And normally, if I wasn't teaching a class, I'd probably try a little harder to make it look like a circle. But even if you can't get it to look like a circle, like I said, it doesn't matter because you can't see it. Take a couple of stitches to lock it in. And close it. Snip it off. And this has got the potpourri that you're going to put in the center. Drop it down in the center of your 2 layers of yo-yos. And then tack it maybe a couple of different places. Stitch the last yo-yo closed. And then if you want to, you can add a button. I found this old antique button in my button stash at home, and I thought it really added to it to make it look really like a little flower. Now, if you're going to use this as a hanging sachet, you can just take a piece of 1/4-inch ribbon and give it a hanger. Or if you just want to put it in a drawer like it is, that's fine too. So that's our finished sachet. And I went through that pretty quickly, but the great thing about having it on video is you can always run it back and run it forward again. If I missed anything, maybe you'll catch it on the second time through.
All right. Thank you so much, Gina.
Oh,
I appreciate your time and all your goodies.
Would you like me to show you some of the things you can
Sure.
make with them? Okay. I'll just go through this really quickly. But the reason I got interested in doing yo-yos, as I said earlier, I like to use up all my little scraps. But as I was going through my mother's things when she passed away, she was a big sewer. And she was all the time, she never had her hands idle. And I noticed that I was finding all these little yo-yos laying around the house. And at first, I wasn't too concerned about them. I threw a few of them away. But then I realized, I got to thinking about, even though they're not hard to make, they are time consuming. So then I started saving all of them. And so these are still some of the yo-yos that my mother made, as well as some of the patterns that she's cut out. So I've got plenty of those to work on in the future. But I wanted to find things to do with those yo-yos. So one of the things I found that she had done, I think this is just beautiful.
Adorable.
She made a little heart applique. And she stitched around it using the blanket stitch. She put 3 yo-yos and then some antique buttons in the center of those. Now, I really don't know what she had in mind for this, but it's special to me and it's something I'm never going to get rid of because I just think it's beautiful. With all those yo-yos, I was looking for things that I could do with them. So that year, the people that sponsor the Cancer Walk had asked the Extension homemakers to make pillows that could be auctioned off to raise money for cancer research. So I came up with the idea of making this pillow. And these are all yo-yos that I found around her house. They were all about the same size. I stitched them together into the square. Stitched the square of yo-yos first. Then I decided how I wanted to make my pillow, what fabric I wanted to use, and how large I wanted it to be. And I stitched the square of yo-yos onto the front of the pillow. Now, a tip for that is, because you want the pillow to be secure, don't just use just the fabric. Iron on a piece of quilt batting first, and then stitch your yo-yos on. Now, you can see that these yo-yos aren't stitched individually. After I made the square, I just tacked them at each yo-yo all the way around the pillow. So that was the first project I made. Some of you probably know about the Cultural Arts Contest Extension homemakers do. Well, the inspiration for the next project came from that Cultural Arts Contest. And that's what I really like about those contests, is not only that you get to show off what you've made, but you get to see other people's ideas. So at the State Cultural Arts Contest one year, a lady had used the yo-yos to make flowers. And I thought, oh, how cute. So I had some old some old sheets, and I used those to make my pillows. And then again, all these yo-yos are ones that my mother already had made up. And you can see she had different sizes. So I had smaller flowers here. And then the leaves are just using ribbon to do the ribbon. It's not embroidery, but I pulled the ribbon up to make the leaves. And then my stems are just rickrack. And again, for the backing, because I wanted them to hold up, I ironed on the iron-on quilt batting, so that makes them a little sturdier. This next project is one that Linda Calico taught a couple years ago at our Cultural Arts Contest. Cultural Arts Camp. If you're not familiar with camp, you should get to be, because we have lots of different classes, usually about 10 to 12 classes. It's usually in the fall, and it can be a variety of things. Knitting, crocheting, wood burning, but these are little yo-yos that she made, and then used pins for that center. And I just think this is gorgeous. Now, this would take a lot of yo-yos, and that's what you're all thinking right now. But the extension office has an AccuQuilt, and it has the little dies to make the circles. So if you have your own fabric, if you want to come out to the extension office, they'll let you borrow the AccuQuilt, and you can make hundreds of the little circles at one time instead of cutting them out all individually using the cardboard template. This last little, well, next to last little thing I have to show you, it's not really put together, but I just wanted to give you the idea. If you've got little girls, this one's actually going to be a little bit big. You need to make smaller yo-yos, but you see how you can layer them? I thought this would be a cute, if it was a little smaller, a cute barrette for little girls. Instead of a bow, it'd be a little different. And again, these are some of my antique buttons. But you just layer them together. You could stitch them. You could use a hot glue gun and just put that all together and then hot glue it to a barrette. And I'm having a little trouble breathing after using this mask for so long. The last thing I want to show you, an idea I had. We all get a lot of these canvas bags when we go to different conferences and things. Or if you want to buy your own, I think they're just $1 at Michael's or Hobby Lobby. And this one has a Second Sunday logo on it. Well, I thought it would be really cute if I switched it out and put a big sunflower on it. So this would be considered recycled. So if you want to enter in the county fair or the cultural arts contest, you need to take a picture first of the way it is, the supplies that you're going to use, like your fabrics and your button, and then you could enter this in the county fair or the cultural arts contest. Now, my plan is to have a big brown button in the center, probably about a 3-inch yo-yo next, and then yellow yo-yos coming out from that center to make it look like a sunflower. Now, how would I get my 3-inch yo-yo? I would double it and then 1/2 inch. So that's 6.5-inch template to make a 3-inch yo-yo. So there are some ideas. Like I said, you can get inspiration from Pinterest, from YouTube. There's lots of things you can do with these little guys, and they really can just be made from scraps of fabric that you have. Thanks very much.